So peatlands are ancestors, are memory, are futures, entities which exist and continue to develop all over our planet for millennia. Swamp, mire, and bog beings, wet beings, including human people, shared fates and created cultures in and around peatlands long before colonization and industrialization, distributed technologies and ideologies for drainage, extraction, destruction, displacement, and resettlement. Our project, Wet Beings, is a transdisciplinary program rooted in the biodiverse organism and troubled ecosystem of the Augstumaler raised bog. Next slide, please. A peatland in the Nemonas, back. Sorry, I had a dramaturgy which I forgot about. Okay, again, our project, Wet Beings, is a transdisciplinary program rooted in the biodiverse organism and troubled ecosystem of the Augstumaler raised bog, a peatland in the Nemonas River Delta at the Baltic coast. From and for this wet being, we gather approaches and examples of contemporary, historical, and future forms of living in and with peatlands which are based on mutuality and sustainable survival of humans and peatlands. So this is what we're starting today. Through this online gathering and a field symposium in and around Augstumaler from 31st of May to the 2nd of June this year, Wet Beings brings together peatland people, artists, scientists, environmental and cultural workers, and researchers. The gatherings are extended by a series of radio collaborations, which will also extend our program into the future and into very different places in which people gather around peatlands. Next slide. I want to introduce my buddy. This is the grass snake. And the grass snake for me is also a kind of icon of trans swamp futures. It is a Eurasian semi-aquatic and non-venomous snake, or they are, and their preferred habitats are open woodland and waterland borders or borderlands, such as the margins between lakes and land, and especially also peatlands. And the grass snake is also a very important being in Baltic mythology, because in Baltic mythology, the grass snake is a sacred animal, and they frequently live together with humans, living under the bed or in a special place near the hearth. After Christianization, the grass snake still retained and continue to retain their mythological significance in spite of the serpent's symbolic meaning as a symbol of evil in Christianity. Many people continued to live by the truth that killing grass snakes can bring grave misfortune, or that an injured snake will take revenge on the offender. I've learned that in the ancient Baltic belief of grass snakes as household spirits, that this belief was transformed into a belief that there is a snake living under every house, and if it leaves, the house will burn down. In the Lausitz region in Germany, where I grew up and where a lot of my family is still based, there are similar cosmologies around grass snakes. And in 2017, when I first was invited to work on the Curonian Spit, the Lithuanian tale of Egle, the queen of grass snakes, became a guiding story for our collective, the Many-Headed Hydra, and our work with the ecologies and mythologies around the Curonian lagoon. So for me to come to Augstumaler and work with our colleagues there and with people there is also a return, and a return with that snake. And I hope that they can help us and guide us also a little bit in our wet being endeavors. Next slide. And as I said, Wet Beings is really based in the 9,000 years old living archive that stretches itself between the Lake Lanka and the lower reaches of the rivers Teninis and Minja in the delta of the Nemonas River. It is an ancestor and a multiplicity of ancestors. In our research trip in early April, Thomas, an archaeologist, told us about findings of human presences in the area that date back to 11,000 years ago. The place where these ancestral presences were located is now an island Next slide. Created by a small birch forest on a hill of mineral soil, in the middle of vast peat extraction fields that stretch into the horizon. Augstmala is also one of the largest peat extraction sites in the Baltics. And the German company Klaas Mandalman extracts on 2/3 of the total expansion of Augstmala, scraping away its bog body and continuing the history of German colonialism in the area. Next slide. Next one. The Augstmala peatland is a living archive of globally connected histories and realities. As the first scientifically studied raised bog, Augstmala is an example of the material consequences of scientific and cultural narratives and the need for old and new positive narratives to achieve wet cultures in peatlands. Throughout the 20th century, Augstmala mire was designated for industrial peat extraction and unfortunately lost 2/3 of its original bog body due to this destruction. Peat extraction and related intensive human activities have been carried out continuously since the establishment of Prussian mire colonies in 1882. The biggest interventions in peatland history were made during the Soviet modern peat harvesting area in the 1960s and onwards until today. During the time of Prussian colonization, the investigations of early modern peatland scientists, Dr. Karl Albert Weber, opened Augstmala for intense cultivation, with industrial economic exploitation for peat mining, which destroyed, which destroyed big parts of the organism. Under Bismarck, under Otto von Bismarck, in the late 19th century, huge capacities and resources were put into land reclamation efforts in the Nemunas Delta. With Dutch knowledge on peatland drainage, the leading narrative was to drain unhealthy wet badlands and make them arable for human well-being. The research of Weber that is really about the vegetation and the generation or the genesis of Augstmala peatland was directly supported and also very influential for these efforts. So there was a direct connection between the scientific research and the extraction economies that then that were happening around the same time to set in this area. So for us, this early modern scientific study on peatlands that was published in 1902 is a starting point to critically interrogate the relationships of science and the utilization, productivization, destruction, and protection of peatlands across times and ideologies, and to activate diverse and wet perspectives on peatland ecologies, knowledges, cultures, and economy. And I want to just reference two parts of this book. There are quite a lot of really interesting things inside that have more to do also with geological, ecological, botanical knowledges. And as I'm not a natural scientist, I'm a cultural researcher, I look at storytelling and I look at what kind of narratives are also constructed within and in the context of these kinds of publications and research. Next slide. And I was really fascinated by how time and space basically is thought of in this book, and through the engagement with particular wet beings such as this Rasensimse, which goes by the Latin name of Scripus caspitosus, and also other beings. And here on this page, for example, I was quite struck by how Weber has combined the kind of study of how this plant grows in symbiosis and in relationship with the sphagnum mosses, and how every year with the sphagnum mosses growing and basically adding layers and layers of new growth to the peatland, the Rasensimse kind of grows with it. And as you can see on the right side, there is the kind of timeline from the late 1800s until 1900 when Weber was there, which is also kind of like a timeline of the beginning of very strong settlement and drainage, and then making the bog into arable land, and also starting peat extraction in the late 19th century. So in a way, this plant is also an archive of that time, and kind of helps to understand, but also is interesting in terms of like the botanical knowledge of Weber, to see like how these things are connected. Next slide. And then there's a lot of interesting things in the book that to really think with for us. But one of the, I think in terms of like cultural narratives around bogs, and political narratives around bogs and swamps, this very last chapter is quite interesting, which is the view into the past and future of the Augstumal raised bog. And in that chapter, there's a part where Weber writes, the view that we have taken at the geognostic conditions of the Augstumal bog reveals geological processes that can be traced back to the time when the last land ice of Europe melted away. And when the post-glacial period began in this part of Prussia, the eastern modern part of the Curonian Spit was occupied by a reservoir. What struck me here is this normalizing of Prussian time and space backwards into the post-glacial time. So I think there's like a contested history, and the history also of occupation, colonization, multiple kind of cultural histories overlapping. And in this scientific study, in this so supposedly objective description of history of this natural entity or natural being, yeah, there is this very ideological moves being made. And then in the same chapter, Weber speculates about a future of Augstumaler, how it would have been without human intervention. And that future looks quite catastrophical, the way he thinks of it. So he says that either with the continuous growing of the bog, without it being drained, mud masses of the swamp would have submerged the surrounding areas, because it would have just exploded outside, like the swamp would have overflown. Or otherwise, with the sinking of the land, the sea would have broken in and destroyed. He says like zertrümmert, he really like kind of disassembled the whole peatland. So somehow he is making then later also in the same chapter the argument for human intervention, that it is also better for this particular ecosystem, or for the future of that area. So he says that drainage will prevent the further growth of this mire, and also prevent the possible intrusion of the sea. Not drainage, but basically the expansion of the dike network. So both like kind of orchestrated drainage, and also expanding the dike, or like building dikes and expanding a network was something that happened, or that was very much the work of the Prussian government in that time. And he describes the past as well of Augstumaler, and I will just quote: as late as the middle, and it's actually next page, in case someone wants to read the German as well. As late as the middle of the 18th century, the Augstumal raised bog was still a serious and gruesome wilderness, surrounded by vast swampy forest, vast kind of swinging, what are they called? These Schwingrasen, these swinging grasses, or like there's a scientific term which you all probably can like know or maybe write in the chat. And reed beds and wet meadows, over which rain-heavy, towering clouds drifted from the nearby shores of the Baltic Sea. Nourished by their wetness, the pale lawns of the peat bogs grew here for thousands of years. And then he goes into how basically vegetation and animal world are being destroyed, and that is the work of culture. And the thing that I find quite kind of that speaks to the colonial nature of this endeavor also in research is how the Lithuanian people are described. So he in this chapter of the kind of future and past of Akstumala says that basically Lithuanian people were not able to master these wildernesses, and now, thank God, the Prussians came because they are now with, as he says, prudence and energy. The Prussian state has initiated the reclamation of the peatland, and basically describes like how houses are being built, how different paths are being made, how progress is made really in the peatland. And the way the progress is described is by basically elevating the Prussian state and the people that are carrying out the reclamation efforts, and by basically creating negative narratives of backwardness and unableness towards the original inhabitants of this place. And so the kind of future that he sees is that, and I quote, where the forlorn cry of a swiftly passing bird, or the soft plaintive whisper of the wind in the bent pines barely interrupted the sublime silence of the wilderness, soon the joyous noise of playing flocks of red-cheeked and fair-haired children will fill the air. So he's kind of describing the new populations, but also within a very white and German understanding of humanness. So I think the question is really like, what kind of story is part of this scientific narrative, and how does that relate to larger colonial projects within the same time and within also other places in the world, and how does it relate to the fact that now we live in a time that more than 95% of peatlands in Europe have been drained over the last centuries, and the effects of modernist technologies have changed basically the systems of peatlands beyond their resilience capacities, and so that they are now contributing largely to the climate crisis. I mean, there's a lot of recognition of the so-called ecosystem services that wet and healthy peatlands provide in binding large amounts of carbon and of the massive carbon release that drained peatlands do. Even with that recognition, we still lack, in a way, cultural narratives, cultural imagination, and response and responsibility to the urgency of protection and of reintegrating peatland wet beings into larger kind of narratives and understandings of the past, the present, and the future. And so with wet beings, one of the really important tasks ahead, in a way, is really to change these narratives and to look at where they came from, and also how we want them to construct them differently, and also to look at maybe other stories that come from the same time or earlier times that tell of different relationships between humans and peatlands that are more based on mutuality, on cohabitation, on coexistence, and so on. And that's why one of our inspirations for this project is the Potawatomi botanist and author called Robin Wall Kimmerer, who really calls on old stories and new ones that can be medicine for our broken relationship with the earth. So Wet Beings wonders, what is the ecosystem memory that returns with the waters in rewetting these amphibian spaces? And also, how can we listen to the stories that these bog beings carry? Thank you.